We are back with another episode of easily overlooked Sega Saturn games. These are the games that are often bypassed because you want to play the bigger, more well-known games for the platform. I like to spotlight the other games from time to time. Games that may not be perfect, but still have something worth looking into. These games aren't necessarily unknown, but more a case of just easy to look past when everyone is talking about the merits of software like Panzer Dragoon Saga and Burning Rangers. Sit back, relax, and I hope you enjoy Easily Overlooked Sega Saturn Games Part 2. First game is one many people sleep on, and I think it's a great semi-cheap addition to any Saturn library. Mass Destruction is a tank shoot-'em-up that was developed by NMS Software and released on the Saturn in 1997. It was released in North America, Europe, and Japan, though had different publishers for each region. It uses a slightly angled overhead perspective, giving you a bird's-eye view of the playfield. You have missions that need doing, which usually consist of blowing stuff up and getting to an extraction point. Enemy vehicles and ground troops are of course out to stop you, but you can find weapons and armor power-ups to help you when you need them. It isn't too dissimilar from the Desert Strike line of games, so if you enjoy that structure, you will find this to your liking. The graphics engine makes nice use of the Saturn's VDP2 infinite tile feature, so it's nice and smooth most of the time. Beyond that, I wouldn't say the visuals are great, mostly just a middling experience that gets the job done. I think this is the reason it often gets bypassed. It just isn't anything special visually. It can definitely be fun, however, and those that enjoy blowing stuff up should find enough here to warrant the purchase. You can usually get it disc only for under $20 and about twice that complete. As long as we are on the overhead shoot-'em-up kick, let's go ahead and recommend Return Fire as well. This one is really easy to overlook because it was never officially released at retail. As the game was in the final stages of testing, the publisher, Williams Entertainment, axed all Saturn game projects and this one never saw the light of day. Over a decade later, the finished code was found and released to Saturn fans. So close to release was this game, a number of magazines even reviewed it. It's pretty much the same Return Fire you know and love. Pick a vehicle, blow up stuff until you find your opponent's flag, and then carry it back to your base with your Jeep. It's that simple. The only downside to the Saturn conversion here is the performance, which is just all over the place. Sometimes you get around smooth enough, but other times it can be a slideshow of jerky frames that does affect the gameplay. It isn't unplayable by any means, but something to keep in mind for you guys super sensitive to such things. You can find a copy of it on the internet to burn yourself, or find a repro specialist to help you out. Part 1 of this series had a muck, so you just knew Part 2 had to have Scorcher. Scavenger would publish this one as well, a futuristic racing game that has you controlling a cybercycle across desolate landscapes. What you need to know before I say anything else is that Scorcher here is damn hard. I mean no joke, kick you in the balls and smile in your face hard. Tracks are twisty with many areas that allow you to fall off it, which of course just adds to the intensity of the challenge. You need to master each and every turn to be good enough to move on, and things only get harder from there. Scorcher does reward you with great visuals, particularly its high frame rate and excellent texture quality for a game of this era. It's the type of stuff that really makes you feel like you have accomplished something when you place first. It was released in North America, Europe, and Japan, with the latter being rare as rocking horse shit and costing a fortune. Next game up is Tsubaki, a 3D mixed martial arts fighting game that was published by Microcabin and released in Japan only in early 1998. With so many fighting games on the Saturn being so good, this is one to easily bypass without a second thought. It's low budget, the entire game loads in its initial go, and there is nearly no visual variety in any of its presentation. Truth be told, Tsubaki doesn't stand out at all if you're purely looking for something visually pleasing. Tsubaki does have some interesting gameplay, however. The different fighting styles really do take some time to learn. There are smaller, faster fighters that hit rapidly, but do less damage. Some fighters are bigger and stronger, doing massive damage with each hit, but suffer from slower movement. There are disciplines that focus on kicks, while others are more effective at punching. The combo system is simple but devastating once you learn to string attacks together. These combos are aided by a sort of parry system that allows you to knock away incoming attacks and counter immediately. What Tsubaki lacks in visual bells and whistles, it definitely makes up for in gameplay and strategy. The difficulty settings are dialed in just right as well, with easy allowing you to comfortably learn the game, while hard will chew your ass up and spit you out the first time you try it. I don't know what the heck Tsubaki means, or even if I'm pronouncing it right, but it's a good pickup for fighting game fans looking for something different from the projectiles and flashy moves that dominate other fighters. There are some great puzzle games on the Saturn, but I guarantee you won't play anything else like Noon on the system. It's almost a mix of Bomberman and a one-on-one fighting game. The first time I played it, I had no clue what the hell I was doing. It was released only in Japan by Microcabin in early 1998, so there was no instruction manual to help me out. I kinda just had to take the ass whoopings and try my best to figure it out. I eventually began to understand what to do, and once that happened, Noon really opened up to me. It's set up in a versus-style arena with a minimum of 2 players, up to a total of 4. You can play it single player if you are alone, at which point the CPU-controlled enemies will take control of the other players. Each player has a grid of 10 spaces, or 2 rows of 5 slots. Once the game begins, orbs of different colors will appear, dotting the play area on each player's side. The objective is to get at least 3 of the same color in a row and attack the trio to complete a Noon. This sends bombs or black orbs to your opponent's side. Fill up enough of his grid and a countdown timer starts. If this timer reaches 0, you lose. To combat this, each player has full access to the entire playfield. You can concentrate on matching your own orbs or constantly attack your enemy's grid, destroying the orbs he is working with. The gameplay is utterly frantic, and once the action starts, you'll need every ounce of concentration to succeed. Don't let this one get you down if you need a few play sessions to understand the gameplay. It's a rewarding experience that's awesome in multiplayer if you have a few buddies to play with. Some of you may recall the 3DO and PlayStation game Total Eclipse. The Saturn wouldn't get a port of that game, but it did receive its successor, Titan Wars, known as Solar Eclipse in North America. Much like Total Eclipse, this is a third-person shoot-'em-up where you must navigate an on-rails, auto-scrolling environment while blasting away at enemy ships and gun placements. The story is woven together by low-budget and poorly acted full-motion video, with a few notable faces from other projects like Roadhouse and Babylon 5. Titan Wars is not a bad-looking game, and has a number of improvements over Crystal Dynamics' previous effort in a number of ways. The environment here is far more dynamic, with more paths to take and a much more responsive ship. The challenge is there too, with the game makeup being almost entirely centered on life recovery from destroyed enemies. Go too long without replenishing your shields, and you're headed for a death almost certainly. This one does have some problems in its basic design, however. The stages suffer from major repetition, both in their visuals and the fact they go on for way too long without anything changing. Same textures, same enemies, and same objective gets old pretty fast. I don't think this is as bad as some reviews would have you believe, however. For a cheap 3D shooter, I think Titan Wars does offer enough for you to get your money's worth. Just don't go expecting a Panzer Dragoon level of experience.
Energy transferred.
There are lots of really good Capcom fighters on the Saturn. Multiple releases in the same series can make it seem like earlier efforts aren't worth your time. This is definitely true of Vampire Hunter, which was released in early 1996 and was known as Night Warriors in the West. This is often overlooked for the Street Fighter games on the Saturn, and even Vampire Savior, a later entry in the same series. This is definitely a mistake, guys, because Vampire Hunter is an excellent game that doesn't need any extra cartridges to get the job done. There are fewer frames of animation here than the arcade, but this is mostly only noticeable on larger characters like Victor. This is a direct sequel to the arcade original Darkstalkers, now with a couple new fighters and playable boss characters. There's been tweaks to the combo system and special attacks as well, evolving the fighting engine into a faster, more pleasing experience. While this was released in North America and Europe, it's the Japanese version I recommend you go after. It often sells for well under $20 and has a fully English option menu. It's true Capcom did a bang-up job on some of those Street Fighter games, but don't sleep on this one. It looks great, plays better, and has some of the best music Capcom ever produced. In my last vid on the subject, I recommended Decathlete for its great visuals and awesome multiplayer. Winter Heat falls into that same category. Originally a Titan arcade game by AM3 and released on the Saturn in early 1998, this takes on the winter sports genre, including events like speed skiing, slalom, snowboarding, and skeleton, 11 events in all. This one doesn't have quite the nice presentation of Decathlete, but it does now have 4-player simultaneous multiplayer and a much larger 3D environment to play in. The gameplay also sees a boost in both complexity and challenge. Whereas Decathlete was mostly button mashing and timing, many of the events in Winter Heat require more finesse and longer bouts of concentration. It takes quite a bit of playing to get really good, and the 11 events make sure you have plenty to do. Like many games in the library, this is another case where the Japanese release is far cheaper than the other regions. I see it go regularly for under $10, an absolute steal for a game of this caliber. It's a perfect match to the fun of Decathlete, and a must for those of you that enjoy watching athletes wipe out in spectacular fashion. In September of 1995, Sega released Wing Arms, a WW2 flight combat game that leans a little more to the arcade side for gameplay. It has your usual assortment of missions: destroy a certain number of enemies, blow up bases, and of course the mandatory boss fights. The graphics here are smooth and the VDP2 drawn playfield goes on forever. The only real eyesore is the lack of transparent clouds and smoke, which of course is exacerbated by those of us running the game with RGB outputs. The arcade-inspired gameplay will feel right at home for those that enjoyed other Sega efforts like Wing War, specifically tailored to be fast and easy to handle. This is actually helped considerably by the support of the Saturn's Mission Stick peripheral. It adds an authentic feel to this arcade-inspired endeavor. Drawbacks are a complete lack of any kind of two-player deathmatch and its incredibly short playtime. While the last two stages are really challenging, the overall game can easily be defeated in a couple of days with repeated plays. The low price, no matter which region you decide to pick it up, mitigates much of the weight of these negatives, however. It won't be displacing any of the better true flight sims, but for a quick arcade fix, you can do a lot worse than Wing Arms. In late 1997, the Fill-In Cafe developed Asuka 120% Burning Fest Limited would get released on the Saturn. It's a one-on-one fighting game consisting mainly of teenage female combatants. Set in a school for affluent students, each girl represents a club in the fighting tournament. You've got tennis players, cheerleaders, and even chemistry majors here. The gameplay feels pretty different from many of the other fighters on the Saturn, almost having a beat-em-up flow to many of the encounters. Combos tend to run wild in this one, with some matches rarely letting the fighters touch the ground. The visuals are absolutely beautiful and some of the animation is truly impressive for a game that doesn't require the RAM expansions. It was only released in Japan, and prices tend to go between $25 and $50 depending on how many are available at the time. I very much feel it's worth every penny of this, if for nothing more than its variety and difference from other fighters on the system. There was an aftermarket version of this game known as Asuka 120% Limit Over, which is a tweaked version of the official Saturn release. It makes a number of balance changes to the gameplay specifically targeted at competitive play. It was done by members of the original team after the company went under. The variety in the Sega Saturn library really is something for a system that sold so poorly in most areas of the world. At well over 1,000 games, you can really find some oddball stuff out there that scratches the itch for pretty much every genre. It's easy to consult a list of best Saturn games and get the usual suspects, but that often means overlooking games that may be worth your time. There's tons of Saturn software that don't rank high among the upper echelon of greatness, but can still provide a good evening or two of gameplay, sometimes much more. I always took great pleasure in trying out a wide range of games no matter the genre or review scores. While I no doubt ran into plenty of bad games this way, I also found some gems that were far better than I had been led to believe. I think that's what really an overlooked game is. Sometimes you may not know about it, sometimes you may have seen a bad review of it, and sometimes a newer entry in the series just soaks up all the limelight. Whatever the case may be, sometimes you just have to try a game out for yourself to see if you like it. I'm Sega Lord X, thank you guys for watching, and I will catch you next time.